Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been working on the alien planet Kepler 442b for almost 5 years now. Every morning she would wake up in the small research station, drink her coffee, and head out to study the strange rocks and minerals that covered this new world. She was a mountain climber back on Earth, but here she worked as a scientist, trying to understand what made this planet so different from home. The planet had many things that reminded her of Earth, but everything felt just a little bit wrong. The sky was a deeper blue, almost purple at sunset. The mountains were taller and sharper, like giant crystal formations reaching toward the stars. And the gravity was lighter, which made walking feel like a slow-motion dance. Elena loved her work, but she missed the thrill of climbing. Back on Earth, she had climbed some of the highest peaks. She had saved many people who got lost or hurt in the mountains. But here on this alien world, the mountains were too dangerous. The colonists called them death traps, and they were right. One mountain stood out from all the others. The locals called it Mount Zerion, but everyone knew it by another name, Deathpeak. It was the tallest mountain in the region, stretching up into the clouds like a massive spear. The mountain was made of strange crystals that glowed with their own light. During storms, lightning would dance across its surface in patterns that looked almost like writing. 12 people had tried to climb Deathpeak in the past 10 years. None of them came back alive. The mountain seemed to fight against anyone who tried to reach its top. Equipment would break for no reason. Climbers would lose their way even with GPS. The weather would change from calm to deadly in minutes. After the 12th person died, the colonial authority banned all climbing attempts. Elena respected the ban, but sometimes she would stand outside the research station and stare up at the mountain. She wondered what secrets it held. What made it so deadly? What was hiding up there in those crystal caves? On a cold Tuesday morning in March, Elena was doing her regular mineral survey work about 10 kilometers from Deathpeak. She was using a deep scan device that could see inside rocks and detect metal deposits. The machine was the size of a backpack and heavy enough to make her shoulders ache by the end of the day. She had been working for 3 hours when something unusual happened. The scanner started beeping in a pattern she had never heard before. The display showed a strong metal signal coming from high up on the mountain, about 3,000 meters above sea level. This was strange because previous scans had never detected anything like this. Elena checked her equipment twice. Everything was working perfectly. The signal was real, and it was strong. But there was something else about it that made her heart beat faster. The beeping pattern was not random. It had a rhythm, like a heartbeat or breathing, like something was trying to communicate. She recorded the signal and brought it back to the research station. That night, she played it over and over again, trying to understand what she was hearing. The pattern was too regular to be natural. It had to be made by something or someone. Elena pulled up the old exploration records on her computer. She searched through files that were almost 40 years old, from the early days when the first humans arrived on this planet. These brave explorers had tried to map the entire continent, including the dangerous areas that were now off limits. As she read through the dusty digital files, she found something that made her hands shake. In 2050, a team of 5 scientists had attempted to climb Deathpeak. They were looking for rare minerals and studying the mountain's unique crystal formations. The team included Dr. David Chen, a plant and animal expert, who wanted to see if any life could survive in the mountain's harsh environment. The expedition had gone wrong from the start. Bad weather, equipment failures, and strange accidents plagued the team. One by one, the members had to turn back due to injuries or illness. But David Chen had pushed forward alone, determined to reach the top and complete his research. That was the last anyone heard from him. Search teams looked for weeks but found nothing. The mountain seemed to have swallowed him completely. After 3 months of searching, the colonial authority declared him dead. His family back on Earth held a memorial service. His name was added to the list of people who had died trying to conquer Deathpeak. Elena compared the signal frequency with the old expedition records. Her hands trembled as she realized the truth. The beeping pattern matched exactly with the emergency beacon that David Chen had been carrying. After 37 years, his distress signal was still broadcasting from somewhere high up on the mountain. But how could this be possible? No human could survive alone on Deathpeak for 37 years. The mountain was a frozen wasteland above 2,000 meters. The air was thin and filled with toxic gases from the crystal formations. The temperature could drop to -50 degrees Celsius during storms, and the radiation from the crystals would slowly poison anyone exposed to it for more than a few days. Elena sat in her small office, staring at the computer screen. The signal was weak, but steady. Somewhere up there, David Chen's beacon was still calling for help. Either the device had somehow kept working for almost 4 decades or something impossible had happened. Someone was still alive up there. She tried to sleep that night but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined an old man sitting, alone in a cave waiting for rescue that would never come. The thought made her feel sick. How could she ignore this? How could anyone ignore this? The next morning, Elena made a decision that would change her life forever. She sent a message to the Colonial Authority, reporting the discovery of the signal. She requested permission to organize a rescue mission to investigate the source of the beacon. The response came back within hours. The Colonial Authority reminded her that Deathpeak was off-limits to all personnel. They suggested that the signal was probably just equipment malfunction or interference from the mountain's crystal formations. They advised her to ignore it and continue with her regular work. But Elena couldn't ignore it. That night she stood outside the research station and looked up at Deathpeak. The mountains seemed to glow in the moonlight, its crystal surface reflecting the stars. Somewhere up there a signal was still calling. Someone might still be waiting. She made up her mind. With or without permission, she was going to find out what was sending that signal. She was going to climb Deathpeak and solve the mystery of David Chen's disappearance. Even if it meant risking her own life, she couldn't abandon someone who might still be alive after all these years. The mountain had kept its secret for 37 years, but Elena Rodriguez was determined to uncover the truth no matter what dangers lay ahead. Elena knew she couldn't climb Deathpeak alone. The mountain had already claimed 12 lives, and she wasn't about to become the 13th. She needed a team of experts, people who understood the risks and had the skills to survive what others could not. Finding the right people wasn't easy. Most colonists on Kepler 442b were scientists, engineers, or farmers. Very few had the kind of extreme survival training needed for a mission like this. Elena spent 2 weeks reaching out to everyone she knew, looking for people crazy enough to help her. The first person to say yes was Alex Kim, a zero-gravity construction worker who had helped build the space station orbiting their planet. Alex was small and wiry, with hands that never seemed to shake no matter how dangerous the situation. He had grown up rock climbing in Korea before joining the space program. More importantly, he understood how to move in the strange gravity fields that surrounded Deathpeak. The second team member was Dr. Lisa Wang, a medical expert who specialized in treating injuries that happened in extreme environments. She had worked in Antarctica on Earth and knew how cold could affect the human body. Lisa was quiet and serious, but Elena trusted her completely. If someone got hurt on the mountain, Lisa would be their only hope of survival. The third person to join was Captain Jake Morrison, a former military survival instructor who now worked as a security chief for the mining operations. Jake had served in some of the worst places on Earth before coming to this alien world. He knew how to plan for disasters and keep people alive when everything went wrong. His job would be to make sure they had backup plans for their backup plans. Once the team was complete, the real work began. Elena realized they couldn't use normal climbing equipment on Deathpeak. The mountain's crystal formations created electromagnetic interference that would destroy most electronic devices. Regular metal climbing gear would become magnetized and either stick to the mountain or repel away from it at the worst possible moments. They spent 3 weeks designing and building custom equipment. Elena worked with the colony's engineers to create climbing tools made from local materials that wouldn't react to the mountain's magnetic fields. They crafted ropes from plant fibers found on the planet, which were actually stronger than the synthetic ropes they had brought from Earth. The breathing equipment was the biggest challenge. Above 2,500 meters, the air on Deathpeak became toxic. The crystals released gases that could poison a person in minutes. Normal oxygen masks wouldn't work because the toxic gases could eat through the filters. They had to design a completely sealed breathing system that could recycle air for hours at a time. Lisa studied every medical record from the 12 people who had died on the mountain. Each death taught her something important about what they would face. Some had died from the cold, others from the thin air, and a few from something the records called crystal poisoning. She created a medical kit specifically designed to treat these problems, including experimental drugs that might counteract the mountain's toxic effects. Jake's job was to plan their route and prepare for emergencies. He studied satellite images of Deathpeak for hours every day, memorizing every cliff face and crystal formation. The mountain seemed to change slightly from day to day, as if it were alive and growing. This made planning incredibly difficult, because a safe path one day might be deadly the next. The team practiced together every day for 6 weeks. They built a training course that simulated the mountain's conditions as closely as possible. Elena had them climb in the colony's pressure chambers, where they could adjust the air thickness and temperature. They practiced with their custom equipment until every movement became automatic. The hardest part of training was learning to work together in the strange gravity fields around Deathpeak. Alex taught them techniques he had learned in zero gravity, showing them how to use the mountain's magnetic properties to their advantage instead of fighting against them. They learned to climb in ways that would have been impossible on Earth, using the planet's unique physics to help them move upward. As they trained, Elena noticed something troubling. Each of them started having strange dreams about the mountain. The dreams were vivid and felt completely real. In these dreams, they would see themselves climbing Deathpeak, but the mountain would speak to them in voices they couldn't understand. Sometimes the dreams were peaceful, showing them safe paths through the crystal formations. Other times, the dreams were terrifying, filled with images of previous climbers who had never returned. Lisa studied their sleep patterns and brain activity during these dreams. She discovered that everyone on the team was experiencing similar visions which shouldn't have been possible. She theorized that the mountain's electromagnetic field was somehow affecting their minds even from a distance. This was both fascinating and frightening. If the mountain could influence their thoughts from kilometers away, what would happen when they got closer? Elena made the difficult decision to tell the team about the dreams. She was worried that some of them might quit if they knew the mountain was already affecting their minds, but she believed in honesty, and they deserved to know what they were facing. To her surprise, none of them wanted to quit. Alex said the dreams made him more curious about what they would find up there. Lisa wanted to study the phenomenon from a scientific perspective. Jake treated it like any other tactical challenge that needed to be planned for and overcome. They spent the final week of preparation studying the most dangerous part of their mission. The signal was coming from 3,000 meters up the mountain, in an area that no human had ever reached and returned to tell about. The satellite images showed a maze of crystal caves in that region, some as large as buildings. If David Chen was still alive after 37 years, he had to be hiding somewhere in those caves. Elena created multiple backup plans for the rescue itself. They didn't know what condition David would be in after so many years alone. He might be injured, sick, or suffering from mental problems caused by decades of isolation. He might not even remember how to communicate with other people. They prepared medical supplies and psychological support materials, knowing they might be trying to rescue someone who had forgotten how to be rescued. The night before they were scheduled to leave, Elena couldn't sleep. She walked outside the research station and stared up at Deathpeak one last time. The mountain seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and she could swear she heard something like music coming from its crystal formations. Whether it was welcoming them or warning them away, she couldn't tell. Tomorrow, they would begin the most dangerous climb in the history of their colony. They would face challenges that had defeated 12 other brave people. But Elena felt ready. Her team was prepared, their equipment was tested, and their determination was unshakable. Somewhere up there, a signal was still calling for help after 37 years. And finally, help was coming. The team started their climb at 5 in the morning, when the first light of dawn painted the sky purple and orange. Elena had chosen this time carefully. The mountain's electromagnetic storms were weakest during the early hours, giving them the best chance to make progress before the real dangers began. For the first few hours, everything went exactly as planned. The lower slopes of Deathpeak were steep but manageable, covered with loose rocks and small crystal formations that sparkled in the morning light. Alex led the way, his experienced hands finding the best holds and testing each step before the others followed. Lisa stayed in the middle of the group, keeping a close eye on everyone's health and energy levels. Jake brought up the rear, constantly checking their equipment and watching for any signs of trouble. Elena felt good as they climbed higher. Her muscles remembered the familiar rhythm of mountain climbing, and the lighter gravity on this planet made the ascent easier than it would have been on Earth. The custom equipment they had built worked perfectly. Their special ropes held strong, and their breathing gear kept them comfortable as the air grew thinner. At 2,500 meters, they stopped for their first rest break. The view from this height was incredible. They could see the entire colony spread out below them, looking like a collection of tiny toys scattered across the alien landscape. The other mountains in the distance seemed small compared to the massive peak they were climbing. But as they climbed higher, the mountain began to show its true nature. At 1,800 meters, the rocks became sharper and more dangerous. The crystal formations grew larger and started to glow with their own inner light. Elena noticed that her compass was spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Their electronic devices were starting to malfunction, just as they had expected. The first real danger came at 2,200 meters. Alex was leading the climb up a steep section of crystal-covered rock when something incredible happened. Without any warning, gravity suddenly reversed in a small area around him. Instead of being pulled down toward the ground, Alex found himself being pushed upward toward a cluster of razor-sharp crystal spikes hanging from an overhang above. Elena reacted instantly. She had been ready for something like this after studying the reports of previous climbers who had experienced similar gravity anomalies. She quickly activated their emergency anchor system, shooting a titanium bolt into solid rock and connecting it to Alex's safety rope. The bolt caught him just as he was about to be impaled on the deadly crystals above. Alex hung there for a terrifying moment, suspended upside down in the reversed gravity field. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the gravity anomaly ended. Alex dropped back down, shaking but unharmed. The experience left all of them rattled. They realized that the mountain could change the very laws of physics without warning. After this close call, they developed new climbing techniques. Instead of moving one at a time, they began climbing in carefully coordinated groups. When one person moved, the others would be ready to catch them if gravity suddenly shifted. They used multiple safety ropes and anchor points, creating a web of protection that could handle the mountain's unpredictable behavior. At 2,500 meters, they entered what the previous expedition reports called the death zone. The air here was not just thin, but actively poisonous. The crystal formations released gases that could burn their lungs and make them dizzy. They switched to their sealed breathing systems and had to communicate through hand signals because talking used too much precious air. The crystals themselves were another source of danger. Elena had expected them to be like the crystals found in caves on Earth, beautiful but basically harmless. These crystals were completely different. They were alive in some way, constantly growing and changing shape. A handhold that was safe in the morning could become a deadly trap by afternoon. Lisa discovered that the crystals responded to heat and vibration. When they breathed on them or touched them, the crystals would start to grow rapidly, sending out sharp spikes that could cut through their protective suits. They had to learn to climb without touching the crystals directly, using only the bare rock surfaces between them. The most frightening discovery came on their second day of climbing. Jake noticed that their carefully planned route was changing. Passages that had been clear in the satellite photos were now blocked by new crystal growth. Other passages that hadn't existed before were opening up, as if the mountain was reshaping itself to guide them along a specific path. Elena began to suspect that the mountain was not just a geological formation, but something much more complex. The way it responded to their presence, the gravity anomalies, the growing crystals, it all seemed too organized to be natural. It was as if the mountain was testing them, seeing if they were worthy of reaching its upper levels. On their third day, the psychological effects began. Elena started seeing things that weren't there. Shadows moving in her peripheral vision, faces in the crystal formations, paths that led nowhere. At first she thought it was just the stress and thin air affecting her mind. But when she compared notes with the others, she realized they were all experiencing similar hallucinations. The mountains seemed to be reaching into their minds, showing them memories and dreams that didn't belong to them. Sometimes Elena would remember climbing mountains she had never seen, in places that didn't exist on any world she knew. Other times she would hear voices speaking in languages that sounded almost familiar, but made no sense. Lisa monitored their brain activity with a small device she had brought. The readings showed that their brains were being affected by the electromagnetic field generated by the crystals. The field was somehow synchronizing their thoughts, making them share experiences and memories. It was fascinating from a scientific perspective, but terrifying to live through. Jake kept them focused on the mission by constantly reminding them of their goal. Somewhere above them, David Chen was still sending out his distress signal. They had climbed too far and risked too much to give up now. Every step brought them closer to solving a mystery that had haunted the colony for 37 years. By the end of their third day, they had lost all communication with the base camp. Their radios were completely useless in the electromagnetic chaos surrounding the mountain's upper reaches. They were truly alone now, cut off from the outside world and dependent only on each other for survival. Elena looked up at the crystal caves above them, still hundreds of meters away. The signal was getting stronger, which meant they were getting close to David Chen's location. But the hardest part of their climb was still ahead. Tomorrow, they would enter the cave system where no human had ever gone and return to tell about it. As they set up their camp on a small ledge, Elena wondered what they would find in those caves. After 37 years alone on this deadly mountain, what had David Chen become? Was he still human? Or had the mountain changed him into something else entirely? The mountain pulsed with light around them, and Elena could swear she heard it breathing. On the fourth morning, Elena's team reached the coordinates where the distress signal was strongest. They stood at the entrance to a massive crystal cave system at 2,150 meters above sea level. The opening was unlike anything they had ever seen, perfectly round and smooth, as if someone had carved it with incredible precision. The distress beacon's beeping was now so loud they could hear it through their helmets. After 4 decades of searching, they were finally close to solving the mystery of David Chen's disappearance. Elena felt her heart racing as she led the team into the cave. The inside of the cave took their breath away. The walls were covered with crystals that glowed with soft blue and green light, creating a natural illumination that made their flashlights unnecessary. The temperature was surprisingly warm, at least 20 degrees warmer than outside. Alex checked his instruments and discovered that the cave had breathable air, something that should have been impossible at this altitude. They followed the beacon's signal deeper into the cave system. The tunnels branched off in multiple directions, but the signal led them along a specific path. Elena noticed that the walls showed signs of human modification. Someone had smoothed rough sections and carved small steps in steep areas. Someone had been living here for a very long time. After 30 minutes of careful exploration, they found him. David Chen sat in a large chamber filled with incredible inventions and scientific equipment. At 74 years old, he looked nothing like the man in the old expedition photos. His hair was completely white and hung down to his shoulders. His skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, as if he had absorbed some of the crystal's glow. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent, watching the team with curiosity rather than fear. The chamber around him was a masterpiece of survival engineering. He had built furniture from crystal formations and metal salvaged from his original equipment. A complex system of mirrors and crystal lenses gathered and focused the cave's natural light. Most impressive was an energy collection system that harvested electricity from the mountain's electromagnetic storms and stored it in batteries he had constructed from local materials. Elena stepped forward slowly, not wanting to startle him. She had practiced what she would say during this moment, but now all her words seemed inadequate. How do you greet someone who's been alone for 37 years, Dr. Chen? She said softly. My name is Elena Rodriguez. We've come to help you. David looked at her for a long moment before speaking. His voice was scratchy from years of little use, but his words were clear. I wondered when someone would finally make it up here, though I expected it would take longer. Lisa immediately began checking his health, amazed at what she found. Despite his age and the harsh environment, David was in remarkable physical condition. His lung capacity was much larger than normal, adapted to the thin air. His blood chemistry showed changes that helped him process the trace toxins in the mountain air. His reflexes were incredibly fast, fine-tuned to react to the mountain's sudden gravity shifts. As they talked, David explained how he had survived. The first year had been the hardest. After his team had been forced to turn back, he had continued climbing alone, driven by scientific curiosity about the mountain's unique properties. A storm had trapped him in the cave system, and by the time it passed, he was too weak to climb back down. But instead of dying, he had discovered something extraordinary. The mountain wasn't just a geological formation, it was alive. The crystals formed a vast network that functioned like a planetary nervous system. The electromagnetic fields weren't random, but followed complex patterns that resembled communication. David had spent decades learning to understand these patterns. The mountain had been curious about the small creatures that kept visiting its slopes. Most humans approached with fear or aggression, trying to conquer it like they would a normal mountain. These visitors were quickly rejected by the mountain's natural defenses. But David had approached with respect and scientific wonder. He wanted to learn, not conquer. The mountain had recognized this difference and allowed him to stay. Over the years, it had provided for his needs: warmth, clean air, even water that seeped through special crystal formations. The revelation that the mountain was a living entity changed everything Elena thought she knew about their mission. They weren't just rescuing a stranded explorer. They were making contact with an alien intelligence that had been studying humanity for decades. David showed them his research notes, written on sheets of metal using tools he had crafted himself. His findings were revolutionary. The mountain was not just alive, but incredibly ancient, possibly millions of years old. It was a planetary consciousness that had watched countless species evolve and disappear on this world. The mountain had been lonely. For eons, it had existed without finding another intelligence it could communicate with. When humans arrived, it had been excited by the possibility of making contact, but most humans saw it only as a dangerous obstacle to overcome. Elena faced a problem she hadn't expected. When she explained that they had come to rescue him, David was reluctant to leave. The mountain had become his home, his laboratory, and his life's work. He had established a relationship with an alien consciousness that no other human had ever achieved. How could he abandon that? Jake pointed out the practical concerns. David was 74 years old. Even with his adaptations, he wouldn't live forever. If he died on the mountain, all his knowledge would die with him. Humanity would lose the chance to understand this incredible discovery. Lisa added her medical perspective. While David was in good health now, he was still aging. If he developed a serious illness or injury, there would be no way to help him. The mountain might keep him alive, but it couldn't perform surgery or treat complex diseases. Alex, who had been quietly examining David's inventions, spoke up with a different concern. The energy systems David had built were incredibly sophisticated, but they were also fragile. If any of them failed during a winter storm, David could freeze to death before the mountain could respond. The discussion continued for hours as another electromagnetic storm began building outside the cave. Elena watched the storm through David's crystal windows, sheets of lightning dancing across the mountain's surface in patterns that now looked like a language she couldn't read. Finally, David made his decision. He would return with them, but not permanently. He would spend time in the colony sharing his research and teaching others what he had learned. Then he would return to the mountain to continue his work, but with regular contact with the outside world. Elena realized this was the best solution they could hope for. David's research would revolutionize human understanding of alien life. But more importantly, he would serve as humanity's first ambassador to a planetary consciousness. As they prepared to leave, David spoke to the mountain in its own language, of electromagnetic pulses using a device he had built. The mountain's response was visible in the way the crystals changed color and the gentle vibrations that ran through the cave walls. Elena couldn't understand the communication, but she could feel the emotion behind it. The mountain was sad to see David leave, but it understood the importance of what he was doing. For the first time in its ancient existence, it would have a voice that could speak to the larger human community. The rescue mission had become something much bigger than anyone had imagined. They weren't just saving one man. They were opening a door between two different forms of consciousness that had been trying to understand each other for decades. The journey down the mountain turned out to be more dangerous than the climb up. David Chen had lived on Deathpeak for 37 years, but he had forgotten how to work with other people. His movements were perfectly adapted to the mountain's strange gravity and electromagnetic fields, but he struggled with the team's modern safety equipment and climbing techniques. Elena quickly realized they had a serious problem. David's instincts told him to trust the mountain completely. When gravity shifted unexpectedly, he would simply flow with it instead of using safety ropes. When crystals began growing toward him, he would touch them gently to calm them down instead of avoiding them. These techniques had kept him alive for decades, but they terrified the rest of the team. The first major incident happened only 2 hours into their descent. David was moving across a section of loose crystal formations when he suddenly stopped using his safety rope altogether. Alex shouted a warning just as a gravity anomaly hit. Instead of being thrown against the rocks like the others expected, David seemed to dance with the gravitational forces, using them to carry him safely to a ledge 20 meters below. Elena made a difficult decision. She split the team into 2 groups. Alex, Lisa, and Jake would descend using their planned route with all their safety equipment. She would stay with David and learn his mountain techniques, accepting the risks that came with trusting an alien intelligence with their lives. This decision saved them all when the largest electromagnetic storm in decades struck the mountain during their second day of descent. Elena and the others had studied the weather patterns and expected a normal storm that would last a few hours. This storm was different. It seemed to come from inside the mountain itself, as if the planetary consciousness was expressing powerful emotions. David explained what was happening as they sheltered in a small cave. The mountain was experiencing something it had never felt before, hope mixed with sadness. For millions of years, it had been alone with its thoughts. Now, for the first time, it had the possibility of regular communication with another intelligent species. But it was also losing the one being who had truly understood it. The storm lasted for 16 hours, far longer than any previous recorded storm. Lightning didn't just flash across the mountain's surface. It moved in complex patterns that David translated as the mountain's attempt to express feelings it had no words for. Elena watched in amazement as David responded to the mountain's communication using his own electromagnetic device, sending pulses of energy that seemed to calm the raging storm. During the storm, Elena experienced something that changed her understanding of the universe forever. As the mountain's electromagnetic field reached its peak intensity, she felt her mind connect directly with the planetary consciousness. For a brief moment, she could sense the mountain's thoughts and emotions as clearly as her own. The experience was overwhelming. She felt the mountain's ancient loneliness, its curiosity about the small beings that had recently arrived on its world, and its desperate hope that this first contact would lead to a lasting friendship between species. She also felt its deep affection for David, who had been its only companion for so many years. But Elena also sensed something else in the mountain's consciousness. Other minds, other intelligences scattered across the planet's surface. The mountain wasn't the only living geological formation on this world. There was an entire network of conscious mountains, crystal forests, and mineral rivers that had been watching humanity's colonies with growing interest. When the storm finally ended, Elena found that she could still sense the mountain's emotions, though not as clearly as during the peak of the electromagnetic surge. She had become the second human to establish a permanent connection with the planetary consciousness. David was no longer alone in his role as interpreter between species. The rest of their descent became a journey of discovery, rather than just a rescue mission. The mountain guided them along paths that no human had ever seen, showing them wonders, hidden in its crystal caves. They saw chambers filled with floating crystals that sang in harmonious frequencies. They discovered underground rivers that flowed upward, defying gravity through electromagnetic manipulation. David shared 37 years of knowledge during their 3-day journey to the bottom. He taught Elena how to read the mountain's moods and the patterns of its crystal growth. He showed her how to communicate using electromagnetic pulses and how to move safely through gravity anomalies by working with them instead of fighting against them. By the time they reached the base of the mountain, Elena understood that their rescue mission had become humanity's first successful diplomatic contact with an alien species. But it was also just the beginning of something much larger. The return to the colony created a sensation that rippled across the entire planet and eventually reached Earth itself. David's research data proved that humans were sharing their new world with a vast network of planetary intelligences. The mountains, crystal formations, and even some of the stranger weather patterns were all part of a living ecosystem that had been trying to communicate with the human colonists for decades. The colonial authority immediately classified Elena's team as the first official ambassadors to the Planetary Consciousness Network. Scientists from across the galaxy began arriving to study David's discoveries and learn the electromagnetic communication techniques he had developed. Elena found herself at the center of a revolution in human understanding of alien life. She worked with David to establish the first interspecies communication protocols, developing technology that would allow regular conversation between humans and the planetary minds. The mountain that had once been called Deathpeak was renamed Mount Sentience, becoming the first embassy between humanity and an alien civilization. But perhaps the most important change was in how humans began to see their role on this new world. They were no longer conquerors or colonists trying to tame an alien environment. They were guests on a living planet, sharing space with ancient intelligences that had been waiting millions of years for someone to talk to. David established a schedule that satisfied both his scientific curiosity and his relationship with the mountain consciousness. He would spend 3 months at the colony sharing his research and teaching new ambassadors, then return to Mount Sentience for 3 months to continue his studies and maintain his unique relationship with the planetary mind. Elena often joined him on these return trips. She had discovered that her brief connection with the mountain during the storm had changed her permanently. She could sense the emotions and thoughts of geological formations across the planet. What had started as a rescue mission had transformed her into humanity's second native speaker of the mountain's electromagnetic language. 6 months after the rescue, Elena stood once again at the base of Mount Sentience. But this time, she wasn't looking up at a deadly peak that had claimed 12 lives. She was looking up at humanity's first alien friend, a vast intelligence that pulsed with welcoming light patterns that spelled out "hello" in the electromagnetic language. She was still learning to read. The mountain that had once been feared as a killer had become a bridge between two forms of consciousness that had been searching for each other across the cosmos. The forgotten explorer had become the translator who made first contact possible, and the rescue mission had become the first chapter in a new era of interspecies cooperation that would reshape humanity's future among the stars.